All right, we're kicking off. Welcome to React Denver, April 2021. We've got a little change of pace tonight, but we're still remote after the past year. I've started to think about when we might do things in person again, but I think we're still a ways out to make sure that not only are those of us who have good access to healthcare can get vaccinated, but we see more of the population get vaccinated. We're just not there yet to know that we can even talk about it yet. But we're looking forward to that day when things are safe, and we'll figure out the right way to get back together. In the meantime, we've had a really good run over the past year using Zoom and doing this online. Excuse my kids. I'm sure you're used to that from work. Work with colleagues that have families. Yeah, we've had a really great time having this online, and we found that a lot of the events have had a lot of discussion after the talks. And so we've tried to bring that into tonight's meetup in a fun way. Quick thank you to our sponsors. Zoom has been sponsoring our meetup for the past year, and Salt has been supporting our lender dues. Actually, let me refresh this. Wallaby sponsored past meetup. They're rolling off this month. And thank you, as always, to our Open Collective supporters. We run all our finances and our sponsorships through Open Collective, so everyone can see how we spend our money. It's usually on pizza when we're normally getting together. I don't know if we've had much beyond Meetup in the past year to spend on, but yeah, we really appreciate our community supporting us here. If you're hiring or if you're looking for a role, feel free to post something on the Meetup page as a comment or in the Zoom chat. You can post your LinkedIn or your resume, or link to yourself, post a job listing, whatever it is. Feel free to just post freely. We definitely invite that. Announcements, let me check real quick. I don't think we have any announcements for tonight. If you have any, throw some in the chat or throw some on the Meetup as well. And as always, we're looking for volunteers and organizers to add to our team. We actually have Martin Rosenberg joining us to help moderate the Zoom tonight. And we're always looking for more people to join. What we have is essentially a team of people that kind of drop in and out. In any given month, somebody might be busy or need to take a break. We found that to be a really good way to sustain the meetup. It's also a really good way to get involved, meet people, give back, all those things. All right, so tonight, like I said, we're going to have a panel discussion and specifically a career-oriented Q&A. I have a number of questions that we're going to walk through, and I am going to, if somebody could repeat the Slido link in the chat for anybody new to join so they can see it. There's a way for you to submit questions there, and we'll review those questions and try to cover as many as possible. Feel free to ask anything. It's not going to derail the conversation. We'll try to pick them off. And after the whole panel, we're going to open up everything so everybody can just talk, be even more informal. We'll stop the recording at that point, but we can continue the conversation like we have in previous months. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Sam Lindstrom, who has been our lead organizer for some time. He is also a lead front-end software engineer at Salt. David Adams, he is a software engineer at Gusto. Did I say it right? I used to butcher it on purpose because a friend of mine left to go there. But David's also a friend of mine. We get to work together for a period. Yeah, like I can't remember I think I was just leaving when he joined. But David's amazing, and he's been I forgot to say, most of the panelists are organizers who are usually working behind the scenes, and we don't get to hear from them that often. So I took the opportunity to pull Sam in, pull David in. Jeff gave a talk last month, but I pulled him in for this with one special guest I'll get to. Speaking of Jeff, he gave a talk last month, and he's a senior front-end developer at Sixgill, and we're glad to have him here as a panelist tonight. He is one of our longest members of the meetup. He's been around since we were in that office. I'm trying to remember the name of the company in Denver in that high-rise.
I don't remember the name of the building, but it was the 42nd floor.
Oh man, it was it was this small, so a little history lesson, trip down memory lane. It was like a room made for, I think, 8 people, and we would pack 30 people into it. And it was like, it was a scene what we did with that room, and just trying to pack everybody in, having these discussions about
in the Crown Peak days.
Before Crown Peak, the company before that. Yeah.
I see.
Okay. And with that, I'd like to introduce, move on to Daria Caraway. She gave her first conference talk at Dinosaur.js a couple years ago. And since then, she's moved on to amazing career representing our community. I consider her a representative of our community at all the different conferences she's spoken at. She is a fantastic developer and has so many good answers and everything. That's why I invited her. And I thought she'd be great to have. And my name is, I haven't introduced myself yet, Will Klein. I'm a software design system engineer at Workday. And I'll be doing my best to just stay quiet and ask questions of everybody I'd like to hear from. All right. Cool. Is Daria? Let's flip on some cameras and unmute some mics, unless you've got chaos like I do swirling around you. And let me get to. I'm gonna stop my screen share. All right. Cool. And where did I put my questions? All right. Oh, okay. Cool. So I've already introduced everyone, but I thought I have a couple icebreakers. If anyone would like to share how you got started with React, or any other notable experience you have with front end besides or before React. Like maybe you've been an Angular developer for years, you're only doing it now, or you've been doing JavaScript since Gmail was a thing in 2006, or yeah, how did you get started with React? Sam, could you kick us off?
I'd be happy to. So yeah, I got started with React actually. It would have been 3 years ago, in part due to my involvement with this meetup. I was actually a Ruby programmer first. So I had gone through a boot camp 5 years ago or so, 6 years ago now, and was looking for work after my first kind of failed startup experience, and stumbled upon Will Klein, who was building a team at Crown Peak, and they were looking for front-end developers. And thankfully, he took a chance on me and interviewed me for an Angular role at Crown Peak, which I didn't know right then and there, but that ended up being kind of my first foray into front-end development. And, you know, having both some mentorship and a good team around me there sort of nurtured me along the direction of eventually getting into React and then helping out with this meetup. And now I've, been writing React for 3 or 4 years now, and I'm leading a team at Salt. So I have to credit this meetup a ton for my involvement with React to come full circle. But yeah, that's kind of the quick and dirty on how I got into React.
How about you, Jeff?
So I've done JavaScript for about 10 years. I've been a software engineer for about 10. React, I've done React for about 4 years now, maybe. I actually got into React because of Nuclear.js, trying to introduce state management to an application I was working on at that time. And so I actually joined the React Denver meetup because the very first talk was talking about Nuclear.js compared to Redux. So I was interested to learn more, and that story is now that I don't use either. And 6 years later, here we are.
Hey, Daria, how about you?
Yeah, I got started with React back in, I think, 2014 or 2015. I was interning at a startup while I was in college. And the startup, they did machine learning on some cool data, and they had data, but they didn't have a product yet. So part of what I got to do as an intern was just to tinker with a bunch of different technologies and figure out what product we were actually going to try to sell. So I actually learned CoffeeScript before I learned JavaScript, and the app was a CoffeeScript React application. And then I took a huge detour after I graduated college. I worked at a company that did mostly Angular development. So I did Angular.js for about a year, and then I did Angular 2+ for about a year. And then about 3 years ago, I started at Workday and started doing React again. So it's been kind of a wild journey.
What about you, David?
Nice. Mine's a little simpler. My first real job, like real professional coding job, was at Dish Network, and that was about 5 years ago. And I was part of a team that was kind of like building out some new products for them, and they wanted to start using React. So I was on a team that was like using React as my first job, but also the early adopter portion of the company that was trying to like test out this new technology and see if it was feasible. And so started using it then, and then every job I've had since then, the company has also used React.
You've been pretty lucky with that then.
Yeah.
So I heard Daria mention college, and I think Sam mentioned boot camp. What has everyone done for education? Did you attend college, boot camp? Were you self-led? And what are your thoughts on each different learning path?
I'll start out with that one. I have a CS degree. Mine was specifically for database administration. I am completely self-taught when it comes to software engineering. So yes, I have a CS background, but it has led not to do what I do every day. I'm actually a pretty good fan of boot camps myself. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually, as I mentioned, I was a boot camp grad, and it's pretty interesting to me actually to see just in the companies I've worked for in the last 5 or 6 years since I've been in the industry, the mix of people, of backgrounds that you get from both traditional backgrounds and then the boot camp segment, because to be honest with you, I've seen really qualified, capable developers from both backgrounds. And, I'm in a position now at my current company where I lead a lot of hiring decisions. And, I just sat in 2 interviews today, and I can tell you without a doubt that we're willing to look at anybody, regardless of your background, if it's traditional computer science or if it's a boot camp background, just because I've been informed by those positive experiences with people that, in some cases, maybe even they're self-taught. You don't even have to go through a boot camp or a CS degree. So it's been great working with people from all different walks of life.
I can go. I mentioned I went to college. I have a computer science degree joint with a business degree. So I actually went to school for computer science and business administration. It was like a special dual major at the university that I went to. I just want to echo kind of what Jeff said. I learned a lot of like CS fundamentals in university, obviously. But all of my web knowledge came from the internship that I had while I was in school. I took one web class that was an elective at my university, and we learned like the most outdated stack that nobody I saw actually even used anymore.
You remember what it was?
It was PHP, but like old PHP. Like I worked on a PHP server when I graduated school, but this was like PHP for actually rendering. And I think it was using Symfony for the package manager. And like we learned a little bit about MySQL, but we didn't really learn about JavaScript or HTML or like anything that I think is super useful. There are obviously PHP stacks still out there, so that might be useful, but it felt really outdated to me. And I learned all of my JavaScript and like React and HTML knowledge at the internship that I worked at. So in that way, I feel like I'm a little bit self-taught in like the web space. I just echoing what everybody else has said, I don't really care what your background is. I more care about like what your attitude is and what your like thirst for learning, and that you're going to be interested in getting your hands dirty and digging into whatever problem might come your way. I've seen good people and bad people from all sides, so I don't think too much of it.
Yeah, I think attitude is probably the number one thing that I've interviewed many people over the years from various backgrounds, and it's very much that attitude that you bring is what gets you those roles.
Wait, am I allowed to talk? I don't know.
Oh, not right now. Thanks. Sorry.
If you have a question that comes up, would you mind putting it in the Slido?
Yeah.
Because then right after
Let me
this,
try
we
that.
can just go through the Slido questions. I can real quickly go through my background. I used to say that I have a non-traditional background and was recently corrected in the sense that traditional meaning CS degrees, and in reality, the majority of people in this industry do not have a CS degree. So like someone kind of flipped that on my head on me, but I went to school originally and did not have any. I had a liberal arts non-technical degree, and then decided to go back to school and did get a CS degree, but then also did a boot camp, which brought me to Denver after that. So I've kind of done both. I did Galvanize, came to Denver, and then right after Galvanize is when I had my job with Dish Network. So yeah, huge plus one to what Daria and Jeff were saying. Like your background really in terms of educational experience honestly isn't super relevant. I also took a web development class in my CS program that was like ancient PHP that was in terms of like what I do and have done in my career, essentially worthless. And so I learned a lot of web development knowledge doing the boot camp, but have also worked with people that are self-taught and have no formal education or even no college degree who are amazing and great. So yeah, a lot of attitude and like passion is a lot of, I think, what breeds success.
I think there's some really good attitudes here around education background. But I think one thing that a number of people run into is they don't have the degree, and they're either insecure that they don't have the degree, or they're insecure that they don't have a boot camp graduation. Maybe they're completely self-led. Maybe they did some of that and didn't complete it. Has anyone had any experiences with that, or have any thoughts or advice for somebody that fits into that camp?
Yeah, I did a decent amount. There's so much free just access to education right now. What is it? MOOC, like massive online open courses are now like very mature. And I did a decent amount of sort of just like Code Academy free stuff before I sort of went down into like an education path. But I feel like a lot of that is super valuable and it's so accessible, where honestly now, like, I think anyone could absolutely gain the skills they need without any formal education if they have the motivation to go learn the things.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, like too, it sounds like all of the panelists work at pretty sweet companies, but I would say like this attitude isn't necessarily everywhere in our industry. Like there are definitely pockets of the tech industry that will expect you to have a degree, or even expect you to have a master's degree or a PhD, and so it kind of it is something that you might have to take into account, like when you're looking at companies, asking straight up or trying to figure out if they're open and have like good processes for all types of backgrounds, because it's definitely we're not there to the point yet that I know of where like every single company is kind of open in this way.
Yeah, I there's a lot of postings that I filter through weekly, and it's truly amazing the requirements that recruiters sometimes just blanket put out. I've seen entry-level positions requiring a master's degree and 5 years experience. I'm like, I'm sorry, but a master's degree and 5 years experience is not entry level by any stretch of the imagination. But you know, I do work at a really nice place. I really do enjoy it. One of the places I worked at, it was very much time in seat plus degree equaled your status. And so you had to have a degree to even get in the door, but once you're there, it really meant nothing. And seniority was based on how long you sat there, not based on your skills or anything else.
Yeah, it's so true that I mean, the resources that are out there now are so much more ubiquitous than they were. I know someone in the, I think Chris mentioned in the chat, Free Code Camp is a really popular resource. There's so many other resources out there to do some self-teaching. Furthermore, there's, you know, I think a lot more online boot camps than there used to be. I'm sure there are in the last year, especially. But in regards to what Jeff and Daria were saying, it to me, it also underlines the point of like when you're first getting started in your career, and it's really common, I think, to bump up against these job requirements where they're looking for applicants that have, like 3 to 5 years of experience as entry level. And so often I've found that it's just some hiring manager somewhere or an HR person who doesn't put much thought into that. And that really it behooves you to kind of take a chance and apply, even if maybe you don't fulfill every bullet point on the actual, on the job requirement itself. So obviously, if it's requiring a master's degree and you don't have one, then that may be a different story. But, for years of experience, I see so many new people in the industry who get turned off by an opportunity because they don't have the exact, year or two of experience that the application is requesting. And so often, like I can tell you right now as a hiring manager, years of experience counts for something, but we're not gonna, we still look at those certainly. And we don't just throw applications out of the pile if you're not matching exactly what we're looking for. So a lot of companies are like that.
I'm hearing a lot that people are having a lot of trouble in the past year in particular. Is there anything unique about right now? Or is there any, does anyone have any ideas for somebody who hasn't been getting even the interview at the entry level stages?
Send me your resume. Get someone to do some resume reviews. A lot of times I see resumes that are very well qualified, but the resumes themselves are just kind of off-putting. They're 3 pages long. You have to read deeply just to see what's going on. I know even my own in-house recruiter has said, keep it to a page, keep it bullet points. You'll get considered far more often. So you can find me, send me your resume. I'm more than happy to read it over and give you some pointers. I think that's, yes. Send it to me, Huck, and I'll help you out. It's one of those, the jobs that I see, especially when I was looking for a new job, I updated my resume for every single job I applied for and matched the bullet points verbatim of what they were looking for and what I could do. So it was, there you go. Sorry, I'm looking at chat here. Everyone's sending.
I think resume does go a long way, not to cut you off, Jeff, but
yeah.
Like it is also one of those things where, your presentation goes a long way. And you have to also keep in mind what your competition is going to be like in a given space, right? Especially in a market that's saturated with other juniors, which so often the market is. Given the nature of boot camps, you really have to find ways to separate yourself that play to your own strengths. And if you're someone who likes to do public speaking, then that is a terrific way to do that by getting in front of a meetup and having, sharing talks and then discussing that in your interviews. Perhaps you're someone who likes to write or just contribute to open source. I think there are numerous ways to separate yourself from the pack. And it's probably gotten more competitive now in the last year than it has ever been before. But it does require, I think, some creativity and some degree of hustle and thinking through, all right, how can I separate myself from the herd of junior developers out there?
Yeah, it is the junior position. It is unfortunately a tough one to get into because there is a lot of these boot camps out there, and there's a lot of competition for those positions, and it does put a lot of people at a disadvantage, having to kind of fight that battle to get in.
Yeah.
Just oh, go ahead. No, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, to add on to what Sam was saying, when we were talking about like what we were looking for in backgrounds, we mentioned like attitude and your learning attitude specifically. Those are really hard things to capture in a resume. So I would just implore you to put yourself out there more, write some blog posts, speak at meetups if that's something you're into, but having a sample of your work to be able to take to recruiters and hiring managers will go a long way, because it's like a tangible thing that you can say, here is the type of work that I produce. And that's something that hiring managers will be able to look at more concretely than a resume.
I just wanted to plug Sam's point again real quick, because if you are a junior and you are interested in giving a talk, we would love to have you come speak, and we're more than willing to help you. And that's like a huge point on a resume, to say that you've spoken at a meetup. So like we'll support you there. And if you're interested, like, please reach out to us. That'd be awesome.
I'll even add right there, people who are new or more entry level or even uniquely qualified to present on topics. They're still in that learning stages. They know what it's like to be a beginner. So they can relate best to newcomers. They can relate best to people who haven't used something before. It's also a really great way to learn it and get really knowledgeable about it. You are not expected to be an expert on a topic you're speaking on. You're just expected to be prepared in some way. And you can be honest about, like, I'm just learning this, or I've been doing this for a couple months. It's just different varying levels. And the expectations are very, very, very soft and easygoing there. Let's transition a little bit. I'd like to actually talk about React. I like to joke that at the React meetup, we actually don't actually talk about React, but let's do that for just a little bit. Does anyone have any, remember their first few weeks learning React? And do you have any advice for somebody completely new to React, how to learn it today?
Man, docs. React docs are fantastic. The first week I was doing it, it was React 12 or 13, somewhere in there. Mix-ins were still a huge rage. Definitely class components all the way. There's no such thing as functional components yet. It was actually rather difficult because the documentation has gotten a lot better in the recent years. They weren't terrible, but they weren't great. So it was very much YouTube, a lot of videos, and just kind of mix matching with Stack Overflow to kind of figure out what it is you were doing. Today, now, like Egghead.io's got some fantastic introductory courses on React. I mean, can take you a pretty good distance with just the free stuff already. But yes, read the docs. The docs are good.
Yeah, that's always my go-to for anyone new, is pointing them straight to the React docs as a first step.
Yeah, the docs are great. I remember my first couple weeks learning React. I just remember having difficulties understanding the difference between, smart and dumb components, or, there's so many names for them. I think there are a number of concepts in the front end space that are important to grasp over time. State management is another huge one in React that I really struggled with for a while. Redux in particular was one that everyone always said was simple, and it is simple, but not in the sense of like there's still a lot of moving parts. And so now I understand what they meant by saying it was simple. But at the time, I just remember struggling with Redux so much. And I think that there are a number of, like Jeff was saying, a number of great resources out there now to help understand some of these things. And I haven't, I learned React years ago before hooks were a thing, and back when class components were, much more heavily relied upon. And I personally found that class components were easier for me to learn at the time. But that was because I had some context with JavaScript and Angular, and I kind of understood how classes worked a little bit better. I think it just depends on where you're coming from now, and the documentation, as was already mentioned, has just improved so much. So I think that that's a great place to start.
I can actually honestly say I JSX and classes in React, I learned both at the same time. I wasn't familiar with classes in JavaScript until I really started React. So it was kind of I learned both at the same time. So it actually gave me that, I would say, a leg up, because it's like classes are React. I know they're not, but it's like every time I encountered a class, I'm like, oh, it's a class component extends React component. It was nice and easy. I do think the functional approach is a lot easier now, but I did like the class components, at least learning, because there was that a good, like, this is React and this is everything else that I write.
Something that I would recommend too, I don't think this style of learning works for everyone, so take that for what you will. But similar to Jeff, I learned React back, I think, like I said, maybe in 2014 or 2015, and it was still pretty new. And like, if you had a problem, you couldn't just look up your problem and get an answer, because like the community wasn't there yet. There weren't like millions of posts on Stack Overflow. If you had a problem, you just kind of had to figure it out, I guess. And in some ways that helped a lot, because I couldn't rely on other people having already solved the problem. I would have to go and like debug through the actual React compiled code to figure out what's going wrong and what I need to do to change it. And I've just found that that's like a really good learning technique for me personally, is to like debug the actual code that gets generated and run in the browser, because it'll take you on like a whole new level of understanding what's going on. Instead of just knowing like how to use things, you'll start to pick up like how things work under the hood, and then you can kind of take all of those pieces and put it back together again. So if that's something that works for you, I would recommend that.
I will second that. I love reading source code. You will always learn something new, just even how to use the tool that you're going to be vetting. I love reading source code, and yes, when you do encounter a bug, all right, let's drill down that stack and let's see where this thing is breaking.
Are there any particular concepts that you'd expect somebody that's maybe past the beginning stages, has been working with React for some number of months, maybe they're interviewing or they're wanting to join your team? Are there any particular concepts that you really think somebody can't skip or is good to know, or is there anything you think they can sort of gloss over and not worry so much about?
That's a good one.
That is a good one. I do think I touched on it briefly, but it is, I think, understanding how to manage state in the application, and like the flow of state is an important, like it's an important thing to wrap your head around as to how best to do that in a large code base, especially if you're looking to work with a team. They're going to have expectations that you understand how to manage that, and how to compose these components in a way that hopefully is can be built upon and included into other web views and things like that. So state management's a big one that I sometimes see beginners lack an understanding, or just not have the you kind of learn some of that through the pain of experience, right? And I think having your own side projects and getting an opportunity to work on a team where you have multiple code contributors, where good and bad practices are sometimes being employed, like that's how you learn those things. And you just sometimes have to have those realizations for yourself. But state management is one I would immediately highlight.
State management. I'm reading the chat here. Everyone's talking about Redux Toolkit. RTK is awesome. I've talked to Mark about that a few times. What?
You say RTK?
Yeah.
RTK is
Redux Toolkit.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I didn't know what that one was.
Yeah. So it started out as RTK started out as a beginner's toolkit. That's like, oh, in order to learn Redux, use this, and it eventually became, this is actually better than the everyone hates about Redux, the boilerplate, so to speak. And RTK came out of that, where it's like you started to eliminate a lot of the boilerplate reducers and stuff like that. But going back to what Sam was saying, state is kind of one of those things. Application state is what separates portfolio pages to applications. I don't use Redux myself. There's nothing wrong with it, but I don't have a tremendous use for it. I have context for everything that I need, but it is a valuable asset to know and understand what state goes where and when you need to reach for it.
I saw one comment from, I think it was Estelle, talking about how saying I love components and everything makes so much more sense. I think the general idea about like component design is a really good potential interview question. I think at one point I got an interview question where someone gave me just a mock of a page, like what a page might look like in application, and said, how would you break this up into React components? Like what would each component look like? What would their APIs potentially be in terms of the props? Mm-hmm. So I think that's like a good approach or concept.
I might steal that, David. That's like, I mean, that's a really good exercise, I think, for any front-end dev to go through, especially if you're a beginner, to have the practice of how to break apart a page into components that might be reusable is a great exercise for sure.
That was actually the interview that I had not too long ago, had me build a Kanban board, and like no actual code, but like, what would you do to break this thing down into components that would be reusable in a sufficient amount of way, just throwing together names, like not even again writing classes or anything, just like hey, there's 4 columns, okay, you have a column component, stuff like that, just to walk mentally through it. I like that.
At this point, is there anything that still challenges you about working with React or its ecosystem?
Suspense.
Is it out yet?
No, it's not, and that's why it's so suspenseful. I think one of the hooks, obviously, for functional programming is very important. One of the things I see a lot are a lot of misconceptions around like the dependency array, that it's kind of weird. You have to have an ESLint rule in order to figure out if your hooks are written correct.
You're referring to use effect, right, Jeff?
To use effect, use callback, memo,
okay.
All of those that have the dependency array is one of those weird things that like you can get into some weird infinite loops that I've crashed my tab dozens and dozens of times, to where I've had to use the internal tools to kill the tab because it was just killing my CPU, stuck in an infinite loop. And it was because I violated a rule of a hook. And again, I think that's one of the weirder things of I need ESLint in order to make sure that I'm not. I shouldn't have to need ESLint to get there, but it's valuable. I just think it's a little weird.
I think there's a number of things I find myself referring to the docs every single time I use, like, how did this work again? I wanted to, like, is there anything else from anyone else? Yeah, I wanted to see, I want to show that, like, there's a number of things that everyone's always like looking up, or, there's always things that people don't know. So I saw another really good question. I wanted to ask, are there any important JavaScript libraries or JavaScript concepts that go hand in hand with React that you recommend people look at?
One that I think is pretty important, it's maybe a little bit more advanced than beginner, but understanding how JavaScript manages its thread and like how it yields the thread to synchronously run asynchronous processes. Once you start using hooks in React, that becomes increasingly important to understand when a piece of code will run and why, based on like how the thread management is happening. So that's something that I would definitely recommend doing a deeper dive into.
I don't have any specific React libraries that are must-haves. I think probably the only library that I would consider a must-have is Lodash, just because I don't like wasting my time rewriting the simplest filter functions or anything like that. So Lodash is a really good one just to kind of toolkit use. I don't really have anything specific to React.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot that I use either. I can say that our team has fallen in love with TypeScript over the last couple of years, and much of the community has. We're not alone in that, but especially in working on a team, writing interfaces for props, for typing them, as opposed to using the old prop types model, is just far superior. So I can't recommend TypeScript enough.
I always like to say TypeScript is the CrossFit of the JavaScript world, because once you use TypeScript, you only want to talk about TypeScript. But yes, I can definitely second that. Making interfaces, especially for your coworkers who didn't sit there with you writing the component, can easily use it again and go, oh, okay, this is what you need.
Awesome. Let's talk about leveling and career leveling in particular. What do you think makes someone a junior developer versus a mid-level developer versus a senior developer?
This was my question. I'm actually interested to find out from others, because it is, to me, it is such a difficult answer.
We don't have an official canonical definition of this that the whole industry accepts.
Oh yeah, of course. I think we can all get to what entry level or junior would be. I think that's pretty straightforward. But whose definition is mid-level or whose definition is senior? I decided I was senior one day. My manager has no clue at the time what even React was. So his ability to gauge my performance was arbitrary at best. I don't like to use time gating to say, oh, you haven't been here for long enough, you're not a senior. But unfortunately, that's kind of one of the best metrics, I would say, is, obviously, the seniority comes with time, but I also don't like that. So I'm very interested to hear what everyone else has to say.
I can read off Gusto's official attributes for 4 levels.
Oh, wow. You guys have this nailed down, huh?
Well, I don't know if it's nailed down, and it's certainly not perfect, but for our junior level, we have like specific core attributes in addition to others, but main things for junior is can implement software solutions that would be familiar to their team using well-established resources and processes, ships code that is high quality, readable, well-tested. Mid-level makes significant contributions to projects with little outside direction as needed, and has the ability to implement software solutions that are large in scope, even when no existing implementation that is similar exists. Senior always operates in a self-directed manner, deftly navigating ambiguity and prioritizing their day-to-day work, owns major functional areas of the software systems they support, rapidly ships high-quality code that is consistently not prone to under or over engineering.
Define over engineering.
Don't over engineer.
Yeah. I think those are pretty good, David. I'm sure that you'll have differing opinions on that stuff. Like we were saying, this is just so fuzzy. The one thing I would add to that is like, I think as you progress, along those stages, one of the things that I look for is an ability to adequately weigh the trade-offs in certain approaches and design patterns. I think that is also a really important piece of writing good, clean code that functions well, especially in a team environment that someone can, stumble upon months later and still intuit about. So I think some of that's just, a muscle that you build with experience, but and that's so often why we get lazy and just lean on the years of experience as being kind of the primary indicator there. It's the easiest way, but it's not always the correct way, right? And it's just a really difficult thing to gauge the difference between, the beginner, mid, and senior. But I would love to hear what the rest of you have to say.
I think, that's where we do those coding challenges and interviews that we all love to hate, but they're one of the best ways to identify, what someone can or can't do, especially when can you work independently to solve this problem versus do you need a lot of hand holding? I don't know.
Yeah, I think too, part of why this question is so hard is because it's not standard across the industry. Like depending on what company you're at, they may or may not have their own definition for what the levels mean. And like, just because you're senior at one place by no means means you're senior at another place. So I would encourage people to not put too much of their identity into their title, because in my experience, titles across the industry sometimes don't mean too much. So that's something I just want to throw out there. But David, I really liked what you said about the Gusto one, about how seniors can handle more ambiguity. I think that is something that is really key. Like depending on what level you are, maybe if you're junior, you can get anything done that you need to do, but only if there is enough guidance there to provide you with the answers that you need, right? Whereas when you're senior, maybe you can come into a code base that nobody has seen or touched for 10 years. It's completely unknown. Everything is ambiguous, and you just have to make every single decision about what's going on. I think too, someone put in the chat, let's not forget staff principal. I think that's really important too, because senior is also by no means like the top level in most organizations. At the company I work at, senior is, I think, the middle level of the entire ladder.
I think it's like the median. Yeah, it is the middle.
Yeah, like after there's senior, there's staff, and then principal, and then senior principal, and then architect. Like there's so much more to learn even after you're in that senior position.
What do those levels look like beyond senior? Like what are they doing that's different?
From what I can see, when you get to senior and plus, a lot of your job no longer is about you. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of your job, your responsibilities shift from getting work done for yourself to making sure everybody else can get their work done. And so when you get to like principal and staff, like you're not just coding and getting hard things done necessarily, but maybe you're organizing entire teams of engineers technically to get something done together. That's the biggest difference I see.
That's a great answer.
Mhm.
Someone I work with recently used the term force multiplier. Like people in those higher levels tend to like make everyone around them better and better at their jobs and just more efficient.
Yeah, I will agree that, obviously not every place is going to be the same. I work in a company that there's 30 people. So senior is as high as we go at the moment. But it is that, I guess, job titles don't end up really meaning much. Again, because, look at LinkedIn. LinkedIn, we even on our own intros, we all have different titles that probably end up signifying pretty much the same thing. Maybe it's seniority, maybe it's length of time, but the how much purview do you have over your company or your product is probably a better signifier.
Does
I do
anyone
want to
have?
clarify.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
I
Daria.
want to clarify one thing. I said titles are meaningless, and I do want to clarify because I don't think that's entirely true. I just mean that they can vary from where you go. Titles often can be tied to your pay band, which is obviously very important to people. Titles can be very important for underrepresented minorities that may or may not have the same level of like people believing their skills up front. So they're definitely important. I just want to make sure that they're not the end all be all of what everyone's skill levels are.
I'll put a spin on that. I've been a senior for some time, and I don't think I've seen it in a really bad way, but I've actually intentionally removed it. I've actually called my title in Slack, which is like importing from the HR system, some like 7-term long title. And I was like, I'm a little sick of this. So I like cut it down to software developer. I've even like played with it and made it code janitor, but I agree with you that they're not the be all end all. And I actually think that there's the potential for it to even be a hindrance of hearing different voices equally. Not everyone has a senior level title or something like that. And sometimes that gets more credence than it should.
Yeah, and I think Daria's point around identity, because we so often do that, wrap up our identities and what we do and how we do it. And I've seen numerous people get stuck in that mindset of especially once they get a title or something, then it actually does become a hindrance to, like their ability to be open-minded or tolerating feedback or anything like that. There's so many ways in which you have to be careful, around that. And it totally changes from business to business. I work at a small startup with a really small team, probably relative to Daria and David. And so the seniors on my team probably are asked to do different things than they would be at Workday or Gusto. So it's just how it goes.
Looking the other way, let's say we're thinking about trying to become mid-level or trying to become senior level, and we're not getting that promotion or that title handed to us. What thoughts do we have on leveling ourselves, on building those qualifications or getting recognized? How do we do it within our current companies? Do we have to move on to new jobs? What do people think about that?
This is a very important question. Your managers may not actually be subject managers or subject leaders in what you're doing every day. The last place I worked at, barely any JavaScript knowledge at all. So me going up and being excited about X or Y was just way over his head. So to me to go and say, what do I need to do? What are my goals? What should I be focused on? They couldn't give me that information. So it was kind of how do I progress when when no one here can tell me how to do that. Don't be afraid of change. You know, sometimes to move forward is you do have to change. Will here knows more about that because he's the one who convinced me to change a couple of years ago.
You made me think of something I want to throw out there. I actually had a manager that was actually my manager for a very short period, but he asked me to evaluate somebody else because he wasn't qualified to evaluate that person. And I'm really very, I respect that manager a lot for acknowledging that he wasn't an expert in something, and he asked for an outside expert to assess somebody who I think was junior and mid-level. It was somewhere in that range. And I think that's an idea that somebody can employ is either asking your manager to gather input from other people and encourage that, or seeking it directly yourself, finding somebody that's like a mentor or but it's not really quite a mentor thing. It's more, a mentor can do it, but doesn't necessarily need to be a formal mentorship to ask for input and feedback and an assessment of where you stand. What else?
One thing that I recently went through this process, and a big learning that I had was working with my manager was that depending on how your organization is set up, this may not be the case, but my manager's not, like watching over me every day, knowing exactly every single thing I'm doing. So I had to get a lot better about documenting the things that I'm working on. And I did that just by having like a notepad application up or something like that as I'm working through the day. And anytime something comes up, I would like make sure it's documented so that whenever like a promotion case or performance review comes up, you should be able to have that to like refer back to and list all of the contributions that you've made. Because especially for me, I found like when that time comes up and I'm not documenting it, it's just really hard to remember and go back and like try to retroactively figure all of that out.
Yes, very much so. Call it patting yourself on the back or whatever, but yeah, your manager probably isn't watching what you're doing all day. They have their own job, and so if you are going to approach them asking for a raise or a promotion of any sort, come with homework. Prove your worth, and don't just say, well, I've been here for 2 years, I think I deserve it. It's like,
Yeah,
you got to tell me why. Show me the receipts.
this one is so true, and it's such a difficult thing. I've run into it now on both sides of the table as being an individual contributor and now a manager myself. I actually refer to it on my team as work visibility, and I think that it is 10 times harder, well, for our team, and for me, it has been in the last year, as we've moved to remote work where I can't, and I'm not one to hover over my teammates' shoulders anyway, but I don't have the same visibility into their work that I used to. And so instead it kind of puts the ball in their court a little bit more to show the contributions that they're making. And I think it also requires an open dialogue between yourself and your manager to ensure that you guys are on the same page in terms of expectations and what expectations you are or are not meeting, to get to the next level, whatever that is, if that's another pay band or what have you. So for sure, communication is important there. And I think, for some of the best developers I've seen, they have this just really uncanny ability to get their work done in an effective manner. Doesn't always mean it's quickly, but they produce high quality work and they find ways to make their team's lives easier and their manager's life easier. Like that's one of probably the most valuable ways I think to get on the good side of your manager is find ways to take work off of their plate. So those are just a few things that come to mind.
Yeah, I like what you said about helping your team or making your team more effective as well. I think everyone that I've respected most in any given team has had that attribute. Like they're constantly helping their team in some way, whether they're pairing or giving really good code reviews that are helpful and collaborative, or they're building tools that help people get their work done easier. Those things always stand out. And it doesn't have to be a senior developer doing those things.
Something too, I'm my team's Scrum Master, so I think about this probably more than most developers, but creating processes in order to provide your team that visibility and almost like that self-documenting thing, so that when you come and need to show proof, like you don't necessarily have to do anything extra. It's just all there set up for you. Something my team does is every retro, which is at the end of the sprint, we have a kudos column, and it's common for this column to be longer than all of the other columns combined. And like your teammates will just give you shout outs for things that you did that sprint. And one, it means a lot coming from your team because you're not saying it about yourself. But we went through a career and progress check-in recently, and I basically went through all of our team's past retros, found all of the kudos that I received, and was like, here's all the things that I did that was impactful for my team. We also do like a demo at the end of every sprint with like our manager and our manager's manager to show off any work that we did. So that's like a nice spot to provide yourself or your team some visibility, so that you're not just saying you did these things. You can say like, remember that thing that I showed you? Here's how it turned out. Here's what I put into it. And also Will was talking about having like this mentor-like figure. I think when it comes to leveling, I like to think of that person more as like an advocate, because they're not necessarily your mentor, but they're willing to speak on your behalf to like vouch for the type of work that you do. And sometimes that has to be yourself. But having someone else that can also do that is really helpful.
+1 to all of that. I will say one quick and easy hack that has worked for me in my career is, especially in situations where you can't rely on your organization to document some of that stuff. I think there are many ways to achieve some degree of work visibility, right? I think the point around great code reviews is a good one. You know, there's many ways to do that, but if you're in a situation where you feel like your organization is not giving you the opportunity to do that stuff, I actually have a recurring calendar event. I think it's once every 6 months or once a quarter, to remind me to go and do some self-documentation as to what I've been up to in the last 3 to 6 months, what achievements I've made at work, in part so that I can express that to leadership if I need to, or to my manager. And in part also so that, like, if I'm looking for a new job, I have just a list of items that I can run down and explain, this is what I did, A, B, C, and D at my last job. And you know, it's actually been extremely helpful. So
one more thing, because I have been in a situation at a past company where you're doing everything right. Your manager's telling you you're doing everything right. Their manager's telling you you're doing everything right. Maybe their manager's telling you have a one-on-one with like the SVP. They're telling you you're doing everything right. And like you still can't get a promotion. And if that is the case for you, I would encourage you to talk to your manager about like where in the chain it's falling through. Because if like you really can't do anything about it and your manager really can't do anything about it, and it seems like no one can do anything about it, it might be more of like a systemic problem in your organization, and that might not be something that is within your power to fix. So having that knowledge to make a decision about what you do from there can be really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate that. Yeah.
That's exactly what happened to me this while ago. Everyone was on board, but no one could give me answers, and it just, yeah.
Sometimes there are even hard constraints where like there's no budget and it means a pay level bump or something like that, or they have sometimes there are constraints. Sometimes there's something systemically wrong with the organization. I think that's really good to point out, and it's really good to know so you can. I don't know. I would feel better. I definitely could have used this at times in my career where like I would have felt better knowing that it's really not my control or it's not on me. And I'm doing everything I can. And I can kind of let go of that and then decide what I want to do, if staying there is worth it or moving on.
And it helps to do some homework about the organization as well beforehand. So, you know, if you know the company is hard up on sales for the last 3 quarters, and you know product has been failing to ship features on time, it's probably not the best time to be asking for a raise. So I mean, you could be doing everything right and everything in your power. You do have to also pay attention to the outside forces too.
Let's touch on compensation and pay. How much does everyone make? I'm just kidding. How do people go about gathering what they're worth? Are there any like even quick numbers people have in mind for like what does somebody who either just got out of a boot camp or just graduated college or they've been working on a lot of stuff and they're going pro, they've been self-led. What should an entry-level person make? What might a mid-level person make? And so on.
I'll start this one out. I will use a few different sites like Glassdoor and I can't remember them all, but kind of just narrowing down like go look for your job or your target job in various different companies and kind of see what their rates are.
Different companies. I like that you said that.
Because not every company pays the same, and it very well can also depend on demographics. Like, do they pay market rate for Denver, or are they paying you market rate for their home location, which could be Spokane?
San Francisco.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I can't give you answers as to how much each person should be making, but
what could somebody be making, or what's like a reasonable, like people are probably going to start about this range?
In Denver, entry level, I would say 70.
It's such a difficult question to answer.
is.
And I can say that I started well below 70 on my first job. That was years ago now. But at the same time, I knew people in my own boot camp or who were coming out of touring who were making 75 out of their first job. So it depends on if you're working for a startup. It depends on if you're working for a big company down at the tech center. It's just, there's so much variance. And it's something that we actually talk a lot about at Salt at my current job, because we are still very much a startup. And now that we're kind of in this remote economy, even more so, it has complicated things for us in terms of how do we continue to stay competitive now that people aren't as tied to their geographic area, perhaps. And so I think the suggestions around looking at what's out there in terms of remote and just, on those websites like Glassdoor and Levels, that's a great suggestion just to get at least a benchmark. I will say that, for your first entry level job, you may have to make some concessions, right? I think having a hard number in mind for a junior role may not be the best way to go unless you're really confident that you're going to be able to get that. And I don't want to discourage anyone, but I will say that after you have a year of experience or two under your belt, you do have a lot more leverage to really command the salaries that you want. And that may mean that you have to go to a different job. That may mean that, there's a reason that, the average turnover, I think, in most dev jobs is anywhere from like 2 to 3 years. Of course, it depends on where you're at, but there's a reason that is the way it is. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's kind of the situation. So it's a difficult question to answer. Anyway.
Yeah,
oh, no, you go.
No, please go ahead.
I was just gonna say Denver is very interesting because it's been changing fast. Like the numbers that I saw 5 years ago when I graduated school are not even remotely the same as they are now. There's so much more competition in the area. There's so many more big players in the area that are adding a lot of pressure onto smaller companies. The remote thing that Sam mentioned is like a whole other thing. There are companies paying San Francisco salaries no matter where you are. And it is just so dependent on your company. And what I would recommend is maybe at least find out what the pay band is for the company you're interviewing at, and just make sure that you're within that band in a reasonable level. because they might not have the purchasing power to pay you like ridiculous amounts of money like one of the big guys might. But if you're passionate about that company and maybe you're just trying to get your foot in the door, as long as you're competitive for your spot at that company, you'll at least have room to grow there without feeling like you got like the short end of the stick.
One recent development I want to point out, I forget the actual like legal term for whatever passed, but companies in Colorado, I believe, are required to state what they're paying for a role. I'm seeing minimum salaries on roles, and that's very awesome. All that information used to be simply in the hands of employers paying, companies paying money to get market data that us individuals never had access to, besides talking to each other in Glassdoor. So I think that we're starting to see that sort of open up greatly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just updated all of our job posts that have potential for Colorado to like explicitly include the full pay band.
That's good. That I'm excited to see that, because
Same here.
it's also, you know, each sector can wildly vary. I came from a public sector originally, and I mean, 31 was where I started, and now 31,000 is nothing. But that was public sector, and there was no way to get around it. Their pay band was, this is how much you make. Congratulations. As far as like salary negotiations, that's a whole course in of itself of, you know, when you go in and interview and nail the interview, and they turn around and say, okay, we like you, how much do you want? You know, everyone wants to you know, pull out Dr. Evil and I want $1 million, but you know, to actually have a good number in your head as to how much you want to make and how much you can expect them to pay. So you should be able to ask, what's your range, and then come up with a number in that, you know.
Yeah, and I would say if the company's not willing to give you a range, I wouldn't say that's a disqualifier, but for me, that's a big red flag. If you can't even negotiate in good faith and provide me a range, yeah, I don't want it.
I see in the comments, Martin's comment about anytime a recruiter asks for the range, I tell them I don't have one. I think that's totally fine and good. It's generally always not in your favor if right away the recruiter asks for a number and you provide one. Generally, that works against you almost all the time. And I think it's totally fair to flip that question back on them and just
Absolutely.
ask.
If you do give a number, don't feel like you've made a mistake either and that you're locked in. They might try to keep you that way, but that's never really the case, or that shouldn't be the case anyway. I've even given a number that was lower than what I ended up at. And it's never a case where it shouldn't be a case where you're locked in. If you've done that, I wouldn't consider it a mistake or a glaring error. That's always a dynamic thing where you're constantly gathering more information. You're interviewing at other companies, hopefully, and you definitely will be as you get more than a couple of years of experience. So I feel like there's a lot of like, never do these things. But I don't think anyone should feel ashamed or feel like they messed up. You can say, I've been getting other offers, or I'm doing more research. This is where I stand now. That should never be like negotiated in a fixed way where they're like expecting you to stay wherever you maybe started. Cool. We've been having a really good discussion here. I'm gonna bring it down to one question before I sort of open things up and kind of close the more formal part of this. What has helped each of you most in your career that you'd like to share as an example of different ways to progress and have a remarkable career in software?
Going to meetups and talking with other people. Conferences, talking to like-minded people, find out what they're doing and the struggles they've come across and how they solved them, because you may have the same issue, or you may be approaching that same issue, and having that network, having this network of people to bounce ideas off of, it's invaluable. To go to some of these conferences that I've been able to go to. This last year has been very unfortunate for conferences. I've done several remote ones, but nowhere near as fun. The interaction is way down. For me, this has been it. This is how I got to where I am.
The last conference I went with you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Is that the one I was at too?
Yes.
Yeah. Was this React Rally?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were all there.
We were all there.
Yeah. Good times. I would say, just to throw my answer in there real quick, I'm going to pretty much echo Jeff's and just say networking has been incredibly impactful for me, both in the meetup space with this meetup and other meetups that have totally opened doors for me, but also at conferences, certainly. So if that's something that you like, clearly you guys are all here right now. If you're open to networking, I think that can be a huge something that can really provide some leverage for you as you continue to excel in your career. And additionally, I'm going to mention it. I mentioned it numerous times at this at this meetup before, but focusing on soft skills and emphasizing like stuff beyond just technical skills, I think can carry you a long way. And there's a podcast that Will showed me that I still listen to this day, the soft skills podcast. It's just two devs. It's actually the React Rally organizer. He operates that podcast with another guy, and they just talk about soft skills, hiring and interviewing and all this stuff that we've just discussed today. They go over at length. And so I think those are two things that have really helped me.
Yeah, to echo that, I would say like any advancement in my career, honestly, has not been due to my technical skills. A lot of it was based on, like, not that I don't have good technical skills and that I'm not like a great technical contributor or anything, but having that edge up of being that and someone who can communicate, that and someone who can speak with multiple different teams and get everyone on the same page is just like, it's so valuable. And it's not something that everybody has easily. So working on that has been just immeasurable in my career. Also, I would say like not being afraid to take on scary things, like jumping into different parts of the stack and just collecting these different tools. Even if you don't end up loving that part of the stack, having that tool in your belt for you to pull out when it's necessary is really, really valuable.
I have something that I would like to share.
Go ahead, Bae.
Okay, so so I'm a front-end web developer and I have about 2 years of experience. Before that, I was like a self-taught developer, and the first job is very, very difficult to get. But I got my first job from Meetup, a JavaScript meetup in Baltimore, in my local. Before that, I went to all the events like tech event, hackathon, and everything. And before COVID, so you usually, if you go to a local place, you usually meet the same people everywhere. And when I'm ready to apply for a job, I look at the jobs on Slack, jobs channel, and I see an internship open, and I just applied. I was a little bit late to the deadline too, but my husband told me just apply, and I did. And then I just text the person who posted, and I got an interview. And on my first interview, one of the interviewer was somebody who I worked in a hackathon in the past. Yeah, so I think that's kind of helped a little bit. It's about my skill too, because they have like a lot of tests, but I feel like it's not like totally stranger. I think that helped a little bit. And more than that, my contract. So after my internship, I got hired as a contractor at the same place for a year. And then, my contract ended last December. So I took a break for a couple of months and I just started looking for a job like a month ago. And now I got a new offer from another meetup. I applied to like hundreds of jobs, like Indeed and LinkedIn. I just apply.
Where's the meetup?
It's a women who code Boston. I only look for remote jobs. So I go to all meetups that I have on my Slacks and to the job board and look for the job that I want to work, And yeah, I applied. That's like the first 3 jobs that I applied to. And I do the same thing. After I apply for like 3 positions that I think I fit, and I contact the person, but I don't know that person, but I just text her like, oh, thank you for posting this job, and I just applied to these positions. Something like that. And then she texts me back like, oh, nice. I will make sure the HR see your resume, something like that. And I got my first interview very quickly. I didn't even have a phone interview. I got a technical interview for the first interview, and
That's fantastic.
Good.
and I got the offer now, and yeah.
Congrats. Let's celebrate with you.
Yeah, it was difficult. It was 6 interviews that I have to go through for a front-end engineer.
I'll never
There is a system design interview. Yeah, it was difficult, but the first interview is very important, just get you to the first interview, and after that it's on you. But the first interview is sometimes it's very difficult. Yeah, so yeah, just encourage people, especially like entry level. Yeah, like meetups is good. Connection is very good. Yeah.
Thanks for speaking up and sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
David, did we hear from you?
No, I don't know if I
Close
honestly
this
have
out.
much like unique perspective to add after all these great answers.
What would you +1 then?
I was gonna say networking. I think to try and be original, the only thing I came up with was just adopting the mindset of not being afraid to ask for help. The industry I came from prior to this was a very like competitive industry where people weren't very genuinely willing to help each other. And so that was hard for me and a big adjustment I had to make. But just even late into my career, even today, like adopting that mindset of just always asking for help, I think has been instrumental and huge. And the amount of people there's always going to be someone, even if it's like someone in this meetup who is willing to help, like Jeff offering to review resumes earlier.
I'll throw one more perspective because I didn't quite hear it, and not that no one else shares it, but echoing everybody else, networking, meetups, conferences, speaking at these things as well. I found myself in a meeting at work where I was extremely afraid to speak up and I wasn't contributing or doing my job. And I knew I had to change that. So I started at the deep end. I just jumped in the deep end. I started speaking at meetups, which like my first meetup was 5 people. It was very nice and easy, but that was really harrowing for me. And I'm not saying everybody needs to like overcome their fear of public speaking, but like you can come from a place where it's hard to socialize or it's hard to speak up in front of other people. And I think one thing I've seen with like the Zoom chat is, I hope that people have been able to speak up, and I've gotten to know people on chat and in the video talks after each talk when we're doing this remotely. But yeah, if you ever need help doing that, that's something I don't think we've really offered or solicited as organizers is if you're new to the meetup and you'd like help getting to know people, let us know and say something to one of us. I'm gonna try to publicize how to do that better. But if you can reach out to myself or David or Diana or Sam or Jeff, or really anybody that you see as a current organizer, we're like, feel free to approach us and I say, hey, I'd like to get to know people here. Like, that's just an easy way to put it. And we're not going to assume that you have a hard time doing it or it's easy for you or whatever. That's a really fair question we've gotten from people who are new and we'd love to help. Well, thank you all for being panelists on this. Daria, David, Jeff, Sam, you're all fantastic. I'm going to end the recording now, and we're going to keep going and chatting for as long as we like. Thank you all for joining us. I've dropped a link as well to our code of conduct in the chat. Everyone's been fantastic. I just want to point out we have a code of conduct. Continue to conduct yourselves as though you're in a workplace. Everyone has, and we really appreciate that. I'll stop the recording now.
Extra shout out to Daria. Thanks for joining and being our special guest. It's been awesome having you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go through some of the questions we have here on the app Slido. There's a lot of great questions on here.
And I don't think there's going to be a notification that we stopped recording because I realize now I never pressed record.
Oh no.